NutraCast.
I didn't even read the purchase agreement. I didn't have enough money to hire a lawyer at the time, honestly. And, what I thought was going to be a multi-million-dollar deal wound up to be a hell of a lot less than that. And they totally screwed us over. So I think that was a huge learning lesson for me is like, get a good lawyer when you do those deals and make sure you actually read the purchase agreement, I think was a good takeaway for me at the time.
Welcome to Think Business with Tyler, sharing our methods and strategies for success. Join in on our conversations with business owners as we highlight their triumphs and detail how they overcame the challenges they faced while continuing to grow and scale their business. It's time to think life, think success, and think business with your host, Tyler Martin.
Welcome to the show where entrepreneurs spill the real stories behind their success. I'm your host, Tyler Martin, and today we've got Connor Paddon, a guy who dropped out of high school to chase poker dreams, only to build and sell businesses worth millions. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Picture this. A deal he thought would make him rich ended up a total bust, all because he skipped the fine print. That screw-up taught him everything he needed to thrive. From gritty lessons to buying boring businesses, Connor's sharing it all. Let's dive in.
Hey, Connor, thanks for being on the show. How are you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I wanted to start out learning a little bit about you. I'd love to learn about what you do professionally, the first thing. And then second, I kind of want to learn something about you personally, maybe that people don't know.
Yeah, love to. Professionally, I'm working on a company called New Age Ventures now. We're looking to buy boring business, something you and I talked a little bit about before. A lot of people are talking about this now. A lot of the baby boomers retiring, things like that. And I think there's great opportunities out there to take over some of those businesses rather than trying to start one from scratch.
Yeah. And then what about on a personal level? Is there maybe something tidbit you can share about yourself that maybe people don't know about?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anybody that knows me, they will know I'm a huge geek for aviation. I've been flying for about 10 years now. I have my pilot's license. That's my biggest passion right now. So allows me to kind of fly from point to point when I'm going around the States. And it's a ton of fun.
Oh, wow. Do you own a plane or is that on the list of wants in the future?
I do right now, just a Cirrus SR22, small single, 4-seater, but gets the job done. It's a blast.
Aren't those kind of a little scary though? Like with the wind and stuff, like don't they move around a little?
You get used to it. The plane has a whole parachute. Anything goes terribly wrong, you pull a thing, the whole plane floats to the ground. So that's my little safety margin on it.
Does cash flow have you down? Profit not where you think it should be? Maybe it's the long hours. Let's meet to see if I can help. I bridge driving the financial performance of your business to hit growth and success targets. Book a complimentary meeting at meetforgrowth.com to get started now. Once again, that's meetforgrowth.com. I look forward to talking with you. And thanks for listening to the show.
The plane has a whole parachute. Anything goes terribly wrong, you pull a thing, the whole plane floats to the ground. So that's my little safety margin on it.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay. Hey, so let's get into this. So I want to learn about you. So in terms of your entrepreneurial journey, I'd love to start with you dropped out of high school and decided you wanted to try to become a professional poker player. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because that really kind of starts, in my mind, your entrepreneurial journey of kind of making your own way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of give you the short version of it. When I was in about grade 10, can't remember how old I was, but young. I was making some money playing online poker. I thought I'd make money forever doing it. So I said, hell with school, dropped out. And no official big day of dropping out, just kind of stopped showing up one day and never went back. And, after doing it for some time, it kind of became clear to me that, this is not going to be a career for me. So I wound up building a website, teaching other people how to play online poker. And that led to, how do I get things to show up in Google when people search for things like how to do this in online poker and so on and so forth. And that's search engine optimization. And that website kind of went nowhere, but it led me into my first company that I wound up selling, which was a search engine optimization agency. This is kind of way before SEO was known by everybody.
Yeah. And it was, a lot different back then because, back then I had, when it was all taking off, I'm sure you remember these days, or you might remember these days, domain names you could register that had the keywords in them and you'd rank the next day. And at least that lasted for a little while. And then that disappeared and then they'd come up with new stuff. And I think I lost 50 websites in one day because unknown to me, I was doing something called link farming.
Oh yeah.
And I got de-indexed. All my website just disappeared overnight. I went from I think I was making $5,000 a month to nothing the next day.
That happened to me so many times. My first big win at that agency was this limo company in Toronto, and I got one website to the top for them. It was like limostoronto.com. So obviously, it's going to be number one. And they were like, we want to own the first page. So we wound up having 9 out of 10 of the top websites on Google in Toronto when you search anything to do with limos. I made a ton of money, and then all of a sudden one day just shut down. So
Yeah.
we went through that a bunch of times at the agency.
One thing that I'm seeing a pattern with you is it seems like, and this is common of entrepreneurs, like when you did the poker thing, you leave school to do the poker thing, it doesn't work out. It doesn't seem like what's your feeling around failure? Like, do you view it as failure, or it seems like you just keep trying to figure things out?
Yeah, to me, it was always just kind of, I think starting at such a young age was a huge advantage for me because there was almost not even a concept of failure. It was like, oh, this didn't work, or this lost, so now I got to figure out something else. Like there was never any like, oh, I should just quit all this. That was never even a concept in my mind. So I think that was just so ingrained in me. But absolutely, I think you just got to look at failures as, hey, I learned something and take that to the next thing.
Yeah. Okay. So then you sold the SEO agency or the marketing agency, the digital agency. And then what happened after that? What was it there's another business that you built. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I'll mention too about that I think is interesting, that I'll take 2 minutes on this. So
Sure. Take your time.
the story of how we got to actually selling that agency was pretty interesting because this was, as you know, back in the day with SEO, nobody knew what should SEO cost. And I knew that. And it was like, if I'm like a plumber in New York City and I go to Google and look up SEO in New York and I call the top 10 agencies, one's going to tell me it's 10 grand a month. One's going to tell me it's $200 a month. And you're like, what the hell is going on? We don't understand why. And so I ended up building this kind of like tool using very, very early versions of like, I guess my version of AI that scraped like Google AdWords data, things like that, and came up with, you could put in your keywords in your website and it would tell you, hey, this is how much you should spend on SEO. And when I did that, our conversion rate and our leads went 10x. And so in a period of 3 months, we went from making, it was just me and my buddy that had dropped out of university, come join me do this. We went from doing about 10 grand a month to 40 grand a month in a few weeks. And my biggest problem at that time was every new customer I would take, if you paid me $1,000 to do SEO for you, I would spend 3 grand the first month. So I had a negative margin that I would catch up over 90 days. And because we went so fast up, it basically caused me to run out of money to the point I had to borrow some money from my mom. She gave me a bit so I could keep funding it. And then after 6 weeks, I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I found an agency that wanted to buy me. But by that point, 6 weeks in, they were based out of New York. I was living in Toronto at the time. When I sold that business, I was in a FedEx store in New York City in Midtown. I didn't even read the purchase agreement. I didn't have enough money to hire a lawyer at the time, honestly.
Wow.
And what I thought was going to be a multi-million-dollar deal wound up to be a hell of a lot less than that. And they totally screwed us over. So I think it was just, that was a huge learning lesson for me, is like, get a good lawyer when you do those deals and make sure you actually read the purchase agreement, I think was a good takeaway for me at the time. But anyway, that was that little.
That is an interesting story. So how did they screw you? Did they throw like an earn out on the back end that you couldn't really earn, essentially? Is it something like that?
Yeah, I was very young, right? I was still a teenager at the time. And it was essentially them telling me like, hey, this is a, $4 million deal. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get $4 million.
Right.
Less than $1 million up front. And then a lot of that was based on an earnout of continuing that huge growth in percentage terms for a long period, which was impossible, right?
Yeah.
And it quickly kind of sputtered out and then we parted ways.
Yeah. That, I think that's just entrepreneurs, myself included. I mean, it's just amazing sometimes how we will kind of do things just because we're entrepreneurs and we dive in and do things. And then we kind of learn from our mistakes. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're like that. And how did that lead you into the next? So the next thing was, is it scheduled? Is that how you say it?
On Sketch.
On Sketch. Sorry.
With scheduling software. Yeah, it sort of did and it didn't. I mean, our first version of that business, it sort of meant to, having my background in sort of demand gen, SEO, that sort of thing. My sort of original concept for OnSketch, what I wanted to do was, pay-per-click advertising. You look something up on Google like a plumber, you see an ad, you click the ad, that business owner is going to pay Google $10 for that click, let's say. It's based on a bidding system. What I wanted to do was, when I go and look up plumber in Google, my idea in my head was I should just see, as the consumer, 4 p.m. in an ad on Google and be able to click that time slot and book it. And now that business owner doesn't have to worry about converting you as a visitor into a paid lead and all that kind of thing. And that business owner can pay Google $100 for a booked appointment rather than just a click to their website. And I wanted to call it pay per appointment advertising. And so we built the software on Sketch, which was sort of behind the scenes scheduling software. It's called an API. So a bit of a technical product that we could go sell to people like Google or other publishers to offer that to their end customers. I think we were a bit too early for it. So we pivoted about 100 times and sort of found a niche that worked. But that's sort of how it led into it.
But Connor, give me the story. So I mean, at the time, you're a high school dropout, right? How do you get the technical skills or the awareness because I know there's a lot of people out there thinking that, like, why didn't this stop you? Like most people would be like, dude, I don't know how to program. Why am I going in this direction to create these tools? Like, how did you always seem to overcome that?
Yeah, it was so interestingly enough, with the scheduling software company, after I sold my agency, my dad happened to be a programmer, and him and I connected, and we talked about this a little bit. We decided to team up and started together. I had at that time some surface level programming knowledge too, so that was helpful from just building the agency and tinkering and things like that. But he was a true backend developer, and so we partnered up at the time and did that together, and that was great.
That's cool. It reminds me of the book. It's not how you do it, but who you know. I think I'm botching the title a little bit, but it's really who you know, like, and who you can find to get to your goals and help them get to theirs. Sounds like you kind of made that work with a family member, which is cool. So take me through the experience of on Sketch. Where did that go, and where is it now?
Yeah, good question. So that business, I mean, I took a chunk of the cash that I sold my first company for, put it into that to start it, and then we raised a little bit of money. And I think what I didn't realize at the time is software as a service is a totally different beast than, let's say boring businesses, agencies, things like that. I didn't realize how hard it would be. So it took us, I think, 3 years just to get to 10 grand a month in revenue.
Wow.
So that was difficult. That was kind of, those few years were leading up to COVID. And then what happened during COVID was actually great for us because we had built a sort of back-end technology for bigger companies to be able to offer scheduling to their customers. And so COVID came along, and all of a sudden, all these pharmacies in Canada, they needed to have scheduling for everybody to be able to book their vaccine shots. And we ended up winning a lot of those contracts with some of the biggest pharmacy chains in Canada, where we were getting paid several cents for every appointment that got booked. And we also won contracts in the UK and other countries as well for the same thing. And that was a bit of a jump off point. So all of a sudden we went from, 10 to over 100,000 a month in a very short period of time. So it was that chug along for a long time. And then all of a sudden we did really well. And I guess the long and short of all of this was things were going really well for a short period of time. And so rates at that time were absolutely nothing, as you probably remember, early COVID. I didn't want to raise more money. So I went out and I borrowed a bunch of money and leveraged the business, thinking that would be a better move than raising capital and giving away equity. And then in 21, about 18 months kind of after all of this all started, as things were finally looking great for the business, my dad passed away pretty suddenly.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It happens. It's been long enough now, but that was very, very difficult. And he was the one that knew a lot of the lines of code that were kind of sitting below the software. So it caused us, we lost a lot of customers because of it. We had a lot of support issues and stuff. And by the time we sort of stabilized, we were all at the time paying ourselves 50 grand a year in this thing, like him included, myself included. And all of a sudden, out of the $1 million in revenue we were doing, I had to go pay, an agency 500 grand essentially to get somebody good enough that would be able to figure out the code and stabilize things. So it was sort of bleeding us. It took us about a year after that just to kind of stabilize. We lost probably half our customer base. So after going sort of way up, we kind of came way back down. But we did stabilize, and all throughout 2023, we were pretty profitable. It was our first profitable year ever. And then, effectively what happened was a lot of that debt that I took during COVID started coming due, and we weren't in a position to pay it off from the free cash flow. So we decided to sell it. And luckily at that time we were profitable, so we were able to get a decent number for it. But
yeah, that's a great story. You know what I hear, and I think you kind of gloss over it a little bit, just because you're so used to it, resiliency. Because there's so many things the $10,000 a month for 3 years. That's to run a business with two partners at least. I mean, I don't even know the configuration of your business, but it's not like you were making much money. I mean, that was blood, sweat, and tears that were being put in for many years, I'm sure. And then, you kind of start to get over the hill. And then sadly, the passing of your father, who's, the technical arm of your business, and you still found a way to get around that. I mean, a lot of people probably would have folded their business at that point. They probably would have said, hey, let's wrap it up. If I can fire sale it, I will. So a lot of resilience there. It's interesting. Is that just like in your DNA, or are you conscious of it? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. I mean, during those 3 years, we were probably burning 30 to 40 grand every single month for those multiple years, right? And we were both doing other work on the side to try and cover that, and not raising a ton of money, things like that. So there was so many times where I was like, I have a distinct memory it burned into my brain. I think 2 years into that, walking behind our little office building, just being out there like, man, this is never going to work. What am I doing? I should just give up at this point and go get a job somewhere. Like, I hate this. And, you have a lot of those kind of come to Jesus moments where you just gotta double down on it and keep going. So that's been one of my biggest learnings, is just don't give up on it. As long as you have the right business, if you're doing something that makes no sense, it's different, but.
Right. The other thing I heard too, you'd mentioned the word pivot. I think being nimble enough that you're open to pivoting and testing and trying things, I think probably also played into ultimately your success in selling it.
Yeah, I think so. Eventually. Yeah. I mean, we must have changed directions 20 times before we found something that actually really worked with customers, what people wanted to buy. Right.
Wow. Wow. What an interesting story. Okay. So then you sell that. And by the way, what was the sales process like of selling On Sketch? Was it pretty easy, or did you have to go through a pretty lengthy due diligence process? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was challenging. I mean, even for it was a very weird position we were in, or sort of, I guess, a very weird sort of segment that we were in, because anybody that's over, say, 3 million in revenue, generally there's a lot of private equity companies out there that want to buy you, and so you'll have a ton of options. And likewise, if you're under, say, 10 grand a month, then there's a lot of people that will want to kind of acqui-hire you and buy you for your tech, let's say. Where we sat was a very challenging part of the market, so it ended up being a lot of conversations. And just, what I learned in this one, which was interesting, it wasn't really by design, it just kind of worked out as it did. Canada raised its capital gains tax from 50 to 66% June 24th of last year. And so 3 months before that, when we met somebody who it seemed like it would be a good fit for them to buy it, from me to them, it was like, hey, June 24th, this goes way up and it won't make sense for us to do a deal. So it's either we do it by this day or this doesn't happen. And that gave me a very real deadline to kind of push on the buyer and say, hey, this has to happen before then. That really helped, because every time, we'd be stuck on something, it'd be like, hey, a reminder, if this doesn't happen by June 24th, forget it. Right. And I think that was really useful. So having some sort of, external motivator, I think, was very helpful. But we went through the process a year prior to that, I would say at least 10 different times with 10 different people who we thought would buy us.
Wow.
It didn't work out. So I think that's another one of those resilience things. Like, you get to the very end where you think you're getting a check in 2 weeks, and all of a sudden everything falls apart, and it just happens.
Yeah. I've been through 2 sales, the selling side, and it is very emotional. I couldn't imagine, especially if you're getting to the 11th hour, because you're like in your head, you're figuring out your future plans, you're maybe counting your money, which you probably shouldn't be doing. And then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from under you.
It happens to every entrepreneur I know describes it that exact same way. Right. And that's when you get grinded on the price, and you gotta make sure you don't get down that hole, but everybody does it. So
yeah. Wow. Interesting. So I want to now shift gears and get into this boring business. Can you define what is a boring business in your mind?
Yeah, to me, a boring business is, things that have been around a long time, things that, have a ton of competition out there, but it doesn't really matter. It's an essential service maybe. So, any sort of home services or commercial services, cleaning companies or lighting companies, manufacturing companies, things like that, again, aren't, trying to innovate and change the world necessarily. They're just good, solid, stable businesses. And that's, a big focus of where I'm trying to spend my time today.
If you're a business owner feeling stuck in your business, overwhelmed, responsible for everything that happens, and working long hours, Tyler helps his clients develop processes, hire high-performing team members, and better understand their financial metrics and numbers to allow for a more predictable, less hands-on business. To schedule a free, no-pressure consultation, head to thinktyler.com and click the meeting button. Tyler would love to see if he can help you work on your business, not in your business. Schedule a consultation today at thinktyler.com. Think life, think success, think business.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
And that's, a big focus of where I'm trying to spend my time today.
Yeah. And what does that look like from a seller standpoint? Like, what do you look for? How does a business, because a lot of the audiences, oftentimes when they reach out to me, they have boring businesses or that concept. It's that tried and true business model that's HVAC, home services, consulting companies I consider in that mold, staffing and recruiting, sometimes even healthcare if you're comfortable with that niche. So in all these different business models, what are you looking for as a buyer, and what should a seller be doing in terms of making their business attractive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there hasn't been, there's wound up being a bit of a niche that I've sort of focused on, and that sort of, it almost just fell into my lap, really just from some of the off-market deals that I've found, but I haven't been trying to. I think what I've sort of realized, though, is in a couple of these deals that I've looked at, there's actually, so from a buyer's perspective, from my perspective anyway, I always try and like to have outs, let's say. So, if I buy this business and revenue falls off or key employee goes away or big customer goes away, something like that, then what's my out? And there's some deals, some percentage of these boring businesses out there you can buy. The sum of their parts are worth, almost as much or more than the whole business, just in assets. And if you can find that, but still buy on a multiple of EBITDA, you really win. And so to give you an example of that, like let's say, aviation, like I said, is a big passion of mine. There was some flight school that I was looking at that was for sale. It was too small, but in their case, they wanted, let's say it was doing $500,000 a year in net income and they wanted $1.5 million for it. The plane had enough, or excuse me, the flight school had enough planes that it owned in its fleet that I could just buy the business for 1.5 and sell all the planes and get 1.38 back, right? So, for me to find those businesses where you can almost capture the entire purchase price and the assets back is super helpful. And not just for that reason, but also for the reason of financing too, because then, you don't have to just look to SBA if you want debt. You can go to a bank and get asset-based loans, which are going to be more favorable than, a cash flow-based loan just on cleaning services, for example. So that's where I've decided to look, just because it kind of gives that extra layer of protection for me, I guess, if you will. But there's lots of other good businesses out there that aren't asset-heavy based that might be a good fit for other people.
Yeah. Okay. And when you find yourself turning down deals, aside from like having the downside protection of assets covering it, do you ever see, like, are there common themes that you pass on the deals? Like, for example, the owner doing most of the work. Like, is that going to be something where you go like, nah, because that means I have to go find a second in command? Or, I mean, what are some things, do you see some kind of common themes where you might turn on a deal?
Yeah, I mean, even before I'll even connect to an owner of business, there's a lot of deals that I'll just like that aren't even worth looking at to me anyway, personally, which would be anything like what you just said, where it's owner reliant. So things that are going to be like design agencies or like let's say a cabinetry or a handyman business, things like that. They're probably going to be a lot of relationship based with the guy who's actually doing the work. And those ones I just don't trust that, I can maintain that same level of business. So I would rather something where I know that 90% of the customers are just going to be look this up on Google, call the first guy, and whoever answers the phone first is going to get that job. That to me is going to be those are going to be the best businesses to buy in my mind, because you don't have to trust the seller. Again, a lot of this is probably driven by the fact that I went through that one deal and I was sort of what I felt screwed over, and that makes you look at things a little differently the next time around, especially when you're buying a business. So that's one big thing. Try to think of other things, but I would say that's sort of the main thing that I would look at. I think the only other thing I would say is just, everybody says this in venture capital of like, always trust the entrepreneur. And I've realized that a lot more in terms of looking at buying a business is just, do I trust this guy or do I trust this girl that I'm looking at buying this from? Does the story make sense? Does the reason they want to sell it make sense? Things like that. I think that's important to me now.
How about, do you find sellers are concerned about protecting their legacy, whether it be for themselves or the business? And how do you handle that?
That's probably the biggest thing that I've seen. Both the deals that I'm actively working on right now, one in Canada, one on the West Coast in the States, in both of their cases, neither of the guys that are selling need money. They're both very successful. They love what they're doing right now. They don't actually want to sell the business, but they're both at a point where they know that they don't want to leave a mess to their spouse, and they want their employees to have jobs beyond them. And that's a perfect scenario from a buyer perspective, because I can come in and say, let me buy 70 or 80%, keep a stake, continue running the business. Great for me as a buyer and great for the seller. And, in one of those cases, they wanted guaranteed 10-year deals for all their employees to stay on.
Wow.
And so that's something that we're working through. And that was one of the most important things for them, was they want their employees to just be taken care of.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Beyond, that's huge for them, is legacy, I would say.
Yeah. That was in the second business that we sold. We had multiple offers. And our biggest thing, the reason we picked the buyer that we picked, it wasn't the best price. It was the most stable company. They were a family-owned multi-billion-dollar business. And we were really confident. And they were giving us assurances that they weren't going to let anybody go. And that because they were so big, there were opportunities to promote people within our smaller organization. So it was like, okay, this made sense. It maybe wasn't the highest price, but it just made sense. It was a very fair deal, but it just made sense. So that's cool. That's interesting to understand. And then, I noticed from your website, you said, just to kind of go over the parameters that you tend to look for, is $1 to $5 million in EBITDA. And that's just kind of a fancy terminology for just to keep it simple. That's kind of the profitability of the business. It's not exactly, but it's close enough just for the sake of this conversation. And then 10 plus years of business. So you like continuity. And then 25% net margin. And the only one that I kind of a little bit go, wow, that surprises me, the net margins at 25%. Now I'm reading that as net profit margin. Typically when all the businesses that I see oftentimes fall in that 10 to 20% range. Now I'm not saying I don't see some over that, but the typical do. Is this like an adjusted number that you're looking for, or how do you evaluate that?
Yeah, and I should have probably clarified that, but that's to me, that's adjusted. So with ad seller, things like that, at the end of the day, is 25% or higher than that. I mean, anything that's less than that to me is just not going to be, probably a bit too high on the expense side, where it worries me that you lose a couple customers and the business all of a sudden is just breaking even. So the more profitable, the better. There's definitely, I would say, a subset of businesses that I've found that are easily hitting that number. Like the equipment rental space is one that is sort of the one that now I'm a bit focused on. And that business, you wind up actually seeing 40 to 50% net margins, but that's before the capital expenses of the business, which have to be always replenished and things like that. But it still winds up being 30 plus. So great business to look at. And it sort of has that protection, like I was talking about, of having the asset base in most cases to protect you in case things go wrong in the business. So that's one niche that I've found that's sort of fallen in my lap, and not by design, just through flying. Actually, both the guys that I met and both those deals happen to be in that space. I met them at the airport, walking by their hangar saying, "Hey, I like your plane. Let's have a conversation." And it's just an interesting space, I would say.
That is interesting. So you just were chit-chatting with them, and next thing you know, it kind of leads into a potential business acquisition.
But yeah, that's right.
Wow.
One specifically, it was walking by the hangar. I kind of said, "Hey, I love your plane. Come on in my hangar, have a beer." It's funny, a lot of these guys they'll have a hangar at these airports, and they'll kind of disappear there once or twice a week, maybe to get away from the family, things like that. And we'll clean the plane, they'll say.
Yeah, it's kind of their sanctuary.
Exactly. And just over time, right? You build a relationship with some of these guys. And another one, for example, was I'm building a hotel up in Canada right now. And one of the vendors out there, we needed to get a new well blasted for the property, a commercial well drilled in Canada. And I called every company out there in Canada, and everybody was booked for the next 2 years. And this was the one thing stopping us from kind of moving forward with the getting our building permits. And so I finally found one guy to come out, and he told me straight up, he said, "I'll charge you double what the cost is to normally do it, but I'll show up by Monday." And so we said, okay, come out. We did it. We paid him, probably twice what it normally would cost, but we had to get it done. And at the end of it, I asked him, said, he reminded me a lot of one of the other guys that I'm working on a deal with on the West Coast. So I said, what's your plan with the business eventually? What are you doing with it? Do you have kids that are going to take it over? Just kind of friendly chit chat. And sure enough, no, my kids want nothing to do with it. They want to go in their own direction, so on. And we kept talking, and now that's a deal that I'm under LOI on and in due diligence with. So I think, I love those off-market deals too. I don't know if any of your audience is interested in that world of buying the small business, which I personally think is great, better than starting. But yeah, have those conversations with people, and you never know where they're going to lead.
Yeah. I mean, what's amazing that you'll hear a lot is when it comes to the seller deciding who they want to, the seller deciding who they want to sell to. A lot of it you hear is all about either the know, like, and trust. They trust the party that they're buying from. that you're going to carry out, whether it be that legacy or whatever other things. They trust that you're able to take care of the business, the name. And so that sounds like when you do those off-market deals, it's kind of cool because you've already built a pretty solid relationship with that individual, and it gives you such a big lead in, even if another buyer came in and unless it was probably like grossly different amount, I don't even think they'd probably even consider it because they already have a relationship with you.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is like even if somebody did come in at the last minute somehow with like a way higher price tag, there's other things that I can do as the guy that already has that relationship. Like,
Right.
okay, I'll pay that extra $5 million. Just let me pay it over 10 years, right?
Right.
But yeah, I can't speak highly enough. I mean, for anybody that's out there looking to buy some of these old school, boring businesses, whatever have you, doing it through a relationship with somebody is so much easier than going to a broker. The second somebody hires a broker, pretty much eliminates your chance of being able to build a relationship with a seller, and that's all just going to be about money, and that sucks. So
Yeah.
I make that.
Yeah. What, in terms of like when you are working with the seller, do you usually ask the seller to carry financing on the deal? Do they have some stake in the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something like 85% of all acquisitions closing right now for deals under 10 million are some level of seller financing. It's super common. It's just a great instrument in closing these deals to reduce the amount of cash you have to put into them. So 100%. I'm always.
What is there a particular percentage that you're typically trying to shoot for?
I mean, in a perfect world, you get them to seller finance the whole thing. If parameters are right? And in the one case, I'm working on a deal right now on the West Coast. It's a $40 million deal, and they're going to seller finance me over 80% of it. And it's just simply like what we're talking about, right? Is we know each other. He trusts me. We've known each other for years, and he's confident I'll be the right one to carry on his legacy. And he doesn't need the money personally. He's set, and his family is set for 5 more generations. So that's not the main concern, and the main concern isn't money for a lot of these guys, right? So you can actually get those deals, but there's a lot of people that need the money for retirement too. And I think the best way you can do these deals is leverage returns. And so if you can get an SBA loan, or in Canada we have BDC or some sort of bank financing for 70% is pretty common. If you can get another 15 or 20 from a seller, then you're really reducing the amount of cash you have to put into one of these deals.
Very cool. What's your strategy? Like, do you have a certain number of businesses that you can acquire and you'll be tapped out? Or, I mean, how much are you involved in these businesses once you acquire them? What are you finding?
Yeah, good question. The only ones I've done so far have actually been minorities, and they've worked out pretty well. So I haven't closed on. I really started this journey, I would say, since July of last year when we sold On Sketch. It's a 6 to 12 month process to deal. So we're getting close on 2. There's several other ones that I've sort of been in conversation with, but 2, like I mentioned, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. And my intent in either case is whichever one closes first, close the deal, go in and run it myself for 6 months to kind of learn everything. And then I have a couple people in mind already that I've sort of talked to in advance that are interested and willing to take over and run it, get a small equity stake, good salary to do it. And both businesses can support really good talent coming in. And that's the best part, is if you find those deals where they're doing, let's say, 2 or 3 plus $1 million in net income already, a lot of times the people those businesses have hired aren't necessarily commensurate with the amount of income that they're doing. And so you can go and add players to those businesses for a few $100,000 a year, where currently nobody's being paid more than 80 grand a year, and really go and grow those businesses without a lot of risk at all, because it's a small percentage of the net income currently of the business. So that's sort of the plan.
Got it. And so like this person that you'd pull in, would they be kind of like a second in command integrator type? Is that kind of your vision?
I'd be the first in command, the operator of the business. I don't tend to operate any of these long-term personally. Ideally, kind of get it into a good place. Even with, and I didn't mention this, but with OnSketch, for the 9 months before I sold it, I not hired, but promoted one of the people internally in the business to run it as CEO. And I wasn't involved for the last 9 months of the business. And it was very smooth. I mean, I would check in once a week. It took me 3 months to kind of get her up to speed on everything. And she was great, and she ran the entire business. And it went really well. So my intention is to kind of do the same thing. As long as you learn it yourself first, which I would definitely need to do for 6 to 12 months, then I'm pretty good at delegating and teaching people. So I think that's kind of my goal.
Does cash flow have you down? Profit not where you think it should be? Maybe it's the long hours. Let's meet to see if I can help. I bridge driving the financial performance of your business to hit growth and success targets. Book a complimentary meeting at meetforgrowth.com to get started now. Once again, that's meetforgrowth.com. I look forward to talking with you. And thanks for listening to the show.
I'm pretty good at delegating and teaching people. So I think that's kind of my goal.
Very cool. Man, that sounds fascinating. It sounds like you're off to a good start. Hopefully both close. And before you know it, in the next, 6 months or so, you'll be the proud owner of 2 businesses.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So, hey, before I wrap up, I'd love to just close on, if you could just kind of share, and 3 things would be ideal if they come to mind, just tips or things that you've learned, whether it be in your personal life or your entrepreneurial life, some tips that you could give us that maybe we could apply to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, just some things that came up out of our conversation, which I think is interesting. One, just not giving up, having the resiliency, kind of keep going. There's going to be hard times. Everything's always a roller coaster, like people say, but just kind of making sure you don't give up. If you want to get to the finish line, that's where you got to stay strong. I say the second thing for me anyway, and maybe this is a personal thing, but it might, apply to others. Just don't leverage up too much. We made that mistake and it wound up really hurting us. So be careful. Leveraging businesses and adding a bunch of debt, it can hurt you down the line. I'd say the third thing is just like, at the end of the day, I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but I heard some quote a long time ago that was, what is a company? It's the company you keep. It's a people-based business. And so I've learned that time and time again, is just like hire the right people, or in the case, what we were talking about, if you're looking to buy a business, pick the right seller, pick the right person you're buying from, make sure you trust them. Those would be my biggest 3 takeaways.
Yeah, that's a great one. And one thing I'd add that I learned from you or took from you is kind of have a backup plan. Like, because I think this just doesn't apply to buying businesses. It's kind of really just running a business. Like, what's your backup plan? What's your exit? What's your, if something goes wrong, how are you going to find a way out so that you leverage, keep yourself for leverage and you're not kind of too naked if something doesn't go right. So that was another thing that I thought was a great point.
Yeah, contingencies are great.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so your website, newageventures.io. Once again, I'll say it again, newageventures.io. I'll put this in the show notes at thinktyler.com. If people wanted to reach out to you, is that the best place to go, or is there anywhere else you'd like them to go?
Yeah, no, that would be great. Through that website would be perfect. I am looking to buy businesses. So if anybody's interested, I'd love to have a conversation.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate hearing your story. I love hearing that you got 2 businesses, hopefully that they're going to close for you, and it's going to be exciting next step in your entrepreneurial journey. It'll be fun to hear. Maybe I'll check back in a year and you can tell me. I'm sure there's going to be some challenges, so there'll be good stories to share.
There'll be some new lessons, I'm sure. I look forward to it.
Thanks, man. Take care, okay?
All right, Tyler.
That's all for this episode of Think Business with Tyler. But we have plenty more resources to help you in your pursuit of business excellence on our website at thinktyler.com. If you'd like to be featured in a future episode of the show, feel free to reach out to us on social media at think_Tyler. We look forward to helping you think life, think success, and think business.
Electric acid.